So obviously Obsession was a massive hit, super unprecedented for a movie of its size, of its caliber, and Backrooms wasn't too far behind it. And the one thing that those two movies obviously have in common is that they are internet-based horror movies. Obsession is an original work, but it was created and directed by Curry Barker, and he's been on YouTube for pretty much like a decade now, doing skits and shorts and stuff. And then you have Backrooms, which was a widespread creepypasta over the last few years, and a lot of people have kind of put their own spin on it, done their own creations, added their own lore, and A24 ended up picking it up with the YouTuber Kane Parsons, who created his own little sort of mini series based on the Backrooms that was really, really dope. Highly recommend it. And so what does Hollywood do as soon as we kind of see a trend? They chase it, and they usually chase it on the most surface level. Literally in the past week, we have had 3 internet-based horror movies get announced, like literally within the past week. I kind of want to talk about why I think that's a problem. Not so much that I think these movies are going to be bad, but more so that I think the archaic, overly formulaic nature that executives operate is really not a good thing for the long-term longevity of Hollywood in general, as we've kind of been seeing over the past few years. We just got a Siren Head movie announced. Siren Head's an internet-based cryptid, and we have a Spielberg-directed Mandela Catalog film, which is kind of crazy. Mandela Catalog is a YouTube miniseries it's like an analog horror series set in like 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And then in a similar fashion, we have an SCP Foundation movie happening. And the SCP Foundation, again, it's sort of a collective of different people throwing their hat in the ring, making their own different versions, but the SCPs are like different cryptids, creatures, and stuff like that. And all it took was the success of 2 movies, and this is a pattern we've seen a million times. It just takes really one film for Hollywood to just scramble out of nowhere and be like, we need this thing. Execs are so risk adverse until one movie does something even just slightly different, and then all of a sudden it's the only thing that executives want. Like, yes, data is important, the numbers don't lie per se, but they don't always tell the full truth. Now, I don't want to dunk on the suits, if you will. I think the business end of the entertainment business is important, because ultimately, at the end of the day, without the business end, nothing gets made. Your favorite movie doesn't get made. Your favorite artists don't have a platform to distribute. Nothing really I mean, things happen, but you might not hear about it. Data is important, the spreadsheets, the demographics, the focus groups. But that said, I do think we've gone too far in the other direction, where it's so business focused that we're losing the entertainment aspect of it, and a lot of the artistic integrity is getting lost. Now, these upcoming internet horror movies, I don't necessarily think are going to be bad by any means. Some of them actually sound pretty good, and the one silver lining here for sure is that it seems like they're involving the original creators, but my fear is that the wrong lesson is going to be taken once again, because that is something that Hollywood does a lot. As far back as like Wizard of Oz, they were actually struggling to find a studio that would make a Wizard of Oz movie based off of the books. And the reason that was given is because fantasy movies don't sell. That was their reason. They said fantasy movies just don't work. And obviously, that's ridiculous. But no studio wanted to take the risk on the Wizard of Oz property until the Walt Disney Company created Snow White. You don't need me to tell you that that was a major success. And then all of a sudden, all the studios are like, fantasy films! Sure, yeah, the people want fantasy films, but it just goes to show how tunnel vision that executives get. They look at the rule book until one studio or one creator decides to do it, and then it's a massive success. We want to make only fantasy films. And so obviously The Wizard of Oz was one of the most beloved, iconic, revolutionary films ever made. It is a major cornerstone of Hollywood, and it almost just never got made because of the rule book. It might be hindsight, but imagine passing on one of the most important movies of all time because fantasy movies don't work. We saw the same thing happen with the MCU. Kevin Feige was behind the scenes for a lot of the non-Marvel Studios Marvel movies back before Marvel Studios was even a thing, and he was pitching for years to do a movie with Wolverine and Spider-Man, right? Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and the X-Men. And all the studios were like, no, audiences won't be able to follow along. It just doesn't work. Crossovers don't work. Again, you don't need me to tell you how crazy of a success the MCU was. And then as soon as Kevin Feige proved it, every studio wants a cinematic universe. Oh, the cinematic universe. Yes, we need more crossovers. We need more cameos. Yes, of course. This is the new rule book. They're so caught up in what works and what is part of the rules that they heard the idea of Spider-Man and Wolverine in the same movie, and they thought it was a bad idea. And that's the ironic part, is like a lot of these studios are so afraid to take risks that they actually end up making less money. And to this day, people are still trying to perfect that Marvel formula that Kevin Feige did, at least for the Infinity Saga. And I think a big reason why the Infinity Saga resonated was because Kevin Feige was a comic book fan, and he also was an executive. He also had the business side pinned down. He knew how to market this thing. He knew how to structure it. He knew how to sell the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he also knew on a creative end that he had to do it piece by piece. That's why things came in phases. That's why they took their time fleshing out each individual character and corner of that continuity before doing a big Avengers movie, right? He knew that you needed to be patient. And I think that's something that comes with a combination of good business acumen, but also a good creative sense and an understanding of the source material that he's working with. DC's tried to replicate it twice. We'll see if the second time pans out. I know Supergirl didn't perform super well, but neither did Hulk, right? And that didn't stop them, right? So it's not doom and gloom yet. The Dark Universe was the thing they tried to make happen. Didn't happen. We've also seen this in animation a lot. For a long time, a lot of animated movies had a similar CG style. Still looked nice, a lot of movies still look pretty, but I would say like they were more straightforward. But then Spider-Verse, super stylistic and bombastic and flashy and colorful, and it looked like a moving comic book, and it was amazing, and people loved it. The critics loved it, the audiences loved it. It made $1 bajillion at the box office, and now all of a sudden, Puss in Boots, you had the Ninja Turtles, you had Mitchell's versus Machines. All these movies have a similar style to Spider-Verse, and it's not that these movies are bad. I actually think they're all pretty damn good, especially Puss in Boots' Last Wish is an all-timer. If you haven't seen that one, that movie's fire. You gotta check that one out. Also be ready for some existential dread. But these are great films. Yes, trends change, things change, culture changes, and it is good to be tapped into those cultural changes, right? Obviously something that worked in the 80s, 90s, 2000s may not work today. Some things that work today wouldn't have worked 50 years ago. And we're still seeing this. We don't see any 2D animated movies getting made. A large part of that obviously is because it's more expensive to make a 2D animated movie. But I guarantee you eventually, right? Mark my words, come back to this video. Eventually, a millennial is going to get into a role of power at one of these big studios, and they're going to demand a 2D animated film get made, and it's going to do really well. And then all of a sudden, all the studios are going to scramble to do 2D. Bookmark this video, save it. I'm telling you, it's going to happen eventually. Speaking of animation, we see this with voice acting. Robin Williams came in for the Genie and Aladdin, obviously, and it was hugely successful, hugely iconic. And so all the studios saw that and said, okay, we need to do celebrity voice acting now. That's the key. And so now we consistently get celebrities in voice acting roles for big feature-length animated films, which isn't always a problem. Some of them are really well cast, but it's too by the book. It's not always necessary. You had Jeffrey Katzenberg trying to get Steve Martin to play Goofy in the Goofy movie.
Imagine how you could sell that. That would be great. That means you want Steve Martin to do the Goofy voice? No. He's going to use his own voice. Let me go back into it with Bill, and we'll record with Bill doing it in his own voice. We showed it to him. I said, I'm not behind this, Jeffrey, and we didn't do it. Jeffrey said, I agree with you. This is how the whim of a studio executive can change a movie in a moment.
Now, good on Katzenberg for at least admitting he was wrong. I get it. Sometimes you just kind of have to try stuff. Even if it seems obvious it won't work, sometimes it's good to try things behind the scenes, and I get that. But it seemed like this idea that Katzenberg had didn't come from a creative desire to see Steve Martin as Goofy. Goofy's voice, that's Bill Farmer through and through, and any future iterations of Goofy is going to be a version of what Bill Farmer established for the character. The rules say a big animated feature needs to have celebrities, and now we're seeing that with the Mario movies. And the thing that's so depressing is Chris Pratt as Mario is just as absurd as Steve Martin as Goofy, and yet here we are.
It's a Mario.
Charles Martinet, who's the original voice actor of Mario, is similar to Bill Farmer. He made Mario who he is. Any Mario voice, at least in the games that come after him, is imitating who he created, the persona that he invented. And he's even in the movie through like different cameos and side characters, supporting cast, but it felt disrespectful to me to see Martinet kind of downgraded just so you have the celebrity casting for your big feature-length animated movie. It needs to be a celebrity. And a lot of people argue that like, oh, you don't want to hear wahoo, yippee for, 90 minutes. But I think, the reality is Charles Martinet he's a veteran. He's a real actor. Like if he needed to dial it back a little bit, he absolutely could have. And again, this same argument was used against Bill Farmer's Goofy in the Goofy movie. They thought, oh, no one wants to hear for 90 minutes. The exact same argument, but it worked great because Bill Farmer doesn't just do silly voices. He's an actor. He knows what he's doing. We have moments like this that hit, that are emotional.
Maybe Max isn't all the things that you think a son should be, but he loves me.
I've got my own life now. I know that. I just wanted to be part of it.
And yet he still sounds like Goofy because Bill Farmer is not just doing cartoony voices. Same thing with Charles Martinet. I do think you could have had a movie where Mario sounded like Mario and it would have been fine. And the irony here is that this probably cost the studio more in the long run. If you had smaller actors doing these roles, if you had the original voice actors from the games, the movie would have made just about as much money. It's a hypothetical. We don't live in that timeline. That must have been the Berenstein timeline. And this is not dunking on the cast, by the way. I love pretty much all these actors in various roles. Jack Black's in National Treasure, but when he's Bowser, I don't see Bowser anymore. I see Jack Black. I can't help but picture Jack Black in the booth singing Peaches. Same thing with Seth Rogen. That laugh is just Seth Rogen. That's not Donkey Kong to me. That's just Seth Rogen. So the bottom line is the rulebook kind of made the movie more expensive than it needed to be. It really didn't need to be that expensive. And going back to kind of the catalyst of this, Robin Williams as Genie, they forget to mention the fact that it was contextual because the Genie was pretty much built from the ground up with Robin Williams in mind specifically. So I'm concerned that the success of Backrooms and Obsession, which is, I'm so for it. I love that these smaller movies, smaller creators are getting time to shine. Like it is so cool to see. But I'm concerned that Hollywood is going to take it and misread the room and misunderstand why these movies blew up the way they did. Like I'm afraid they're gonna look at this and go, oh, anything that's internet related is gonna be a hit, or anything that's internet horror related is gonna automatically be a hit. And that's not the takeaway here. But given how fast they're moving on it, it seems like that might be what they're taking away from this. The reality is, I think we're at a point where audiences want something fresh and distinct and real. The word slop gets tossed around a lot. It's kind of a trend at this point. So I think people just really want something more grounded and authentic at this, but we're getting a growing sense of that. Really, I think people have always wanted that at the end of the day. People will eat slop. They'll see successful movies, successful creators that are not doing the highest quality work. There will always be a place for brain rot, but I hope execs are coming into this with a clear head is, I guess, what I would say. And I also hope they look at the budget of Obsession, which was $700K, and ended up making over $400 million, which is nuts. I hope they look at that and realize that, again, the lessons they took from Marvel, which was movies that cost $1 billion to make and a bunch of set pieces and explosions and fight scenes and monsters, that's what sells. And that's the only thing that sells. And that's just not true. And I hope one of the lessons they take from Obsession is that they can go back to making smaller, medium-level movies that can still be very successful. There's so many movies in the 90s, early 2000s that were pretty small budget, not these huge, giant, world-ending stories, and they were culturally relevant, and they're still considered classics to this day, and I hope we can get more of that again. I know it's really hard with social media and online content to kind of cut through the noise on a feature-length basis, but I think ironically, with all of the AI generated stuff going on, with the dead internet theory, with the brain rot, I do think there is going to be a place for people to want to go to theaters once again. That's my hope. A little bit of hope core for your day. But at the end of the day, you can take more risks on a smaller budget project because you didn't spend as much on that project. Risks are so important. Not taking risks, following the rule book, getting that tunnel vision can help in the short term. It might get you some profits in the short term, but it will have diminishing returns. I haven't seen anyone bring up anything about Mandalorian Grogu, right? The idea that a Star Wars movie could come out and not really make waves like that was like unheard of for a long time. Putting all your eggs in that basket, if that one movie flops, like, it has a huge trickle-down effect. I'm hoping that Obsession gets smaller creators a chance to get more eyes on their stuff, and I hope it gives executives and Hollywood studios a chance to open their eyes and broaden their horizons a bit and say, you know, we don't have to put all of our money into these 2 movies over here. We could spread it out, and with the right marketing, with the right word of mouth, and with the right story and the right creatives behind it, we can actually make a lot of money on these smaller, medium level projects. I hope that's the lesson rather than we need internet horror movies now. I just want to be clear, like, executives are not wrong for caring about the bottom line. The bottom line is what ultimately makes everything move forward to begin with. But their grip on the bottom line needs to loosen, because that grip, ironically, is hurting their bottom line in the long run. I think the one thing that I've learned, at least, and that I've seen even on a more macro scale in the entertainment industry, it's a soft science. It's not a hard science. Sometimes it just works. There isn't always an exact one concrete explanation for something. The data is important, but sometimes it just happens, bro. Sometimes there's no clear explanation. If there was an exact formula for how to become big on YouTube, or how to become an actor, or why a movie becomes successful, if there was an exact formula that always works 100% of the time, everyone would do it because it would be easy. Even the Disney live action remakes, they're doing them because they're safe, and a lot of them make a ton of money, but we've seen duds in that front too. Not every single live action Disney movie does super well. The Moana movie, as big as Moana is a huge movie. As big as it is, the live action remake is so far not on course to do very well at the box office, right? So you can't always just go with the most obvious answer, because the most obvious answer might lose you money too. Sometimes you just have to feel what's right.
Scott Storch told me to not use the 808s that I use still to this day. And that's the same 808s I used on Kanye's 808s and Heartbreak. Snoop Dogg told me that auto-tune shit was a gimmick, and it was only gonna last for like 1 or 2 singles. I don't know what a hit is. I have no idea what a hit is. I know when I make a song, what it makes me feel like. And there's a certain feeling that's always correlated with what people call a hit.
There was a time where Star Wars was risky. There was a time where SpongeBob was risky. SpongeBob was new. I was there, right? I'm aging myself right now. I was there when SpongeBob premiered. You know, at that time, Rugrats was the big show. But imagine if they saw SpongeBob and was like, this has a very different vibe than Rugrats, and Rugrats is our biggest hit. So we're not going to do SpongeBob. Sorry. We're gonna pass. Your next huge hit is probably going to be a risk eventually. Risks don't always pay off, and you need to be calculated and smart about how and when you take risks, of course, right? I'm not saying studios should just throw caution to the wind and say, forget it, who cares, just try everything, throw it at the wall. But I do think they should take more risks overall, and I don't know that this influx of internet horror movies specifically is like the answer. My fear is that instead of seeing a bunch of different types of movies, like comedies, romance, dramas, and horror of similar size and with different creatives and different voices, the thing that Hollywood is seeing is like internet horror movies. That's what we need. And then we're just going to see an influx of just internet horror movies. We're going to see a Jeff the Killer movie before we know it. We're going to see Candle Cove movie before we know it. Like, that's just all it's going to be for the next like 5 years until it proves to not necessarily work, because as we've seen, just because something is a trend doesn't mean it always works. All the other cinematic universes failed. There's a reason for that. Curious to know what you guys think. Do you think Hollywood is learning the wrong or right lessons? Do you think the new upcoming internet horror movies are going to be just as good? I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think it's good that the original creators are seemingly involved so far. So I think, you know, I'm definitely hopeful here. And I love to see the success of Obsession and Backrooms and everything. And seeing a movie like Obsession with such a small budget. I'm, you know, from LA, and I know so many actors who've been pushing and pushing for years. And it's just cool to see someone get a big break kind of almost overnight like that. And so my hope is that we'll see more of that rather than just copy paste internet horror movies. And that's it. That's it for this one. I'll catch y'all later.